Hello!
Hi everyone, happy Saturday.
We're back with another live. We showed some samples of Stephanie's wool work yesterday. I think that kind of got some people asking about some of the different wool projects that we have, or even what type of threads that we have for wool. So we thought we would just do a quick kind of session on our wool stuff and answer some of the questions that people DM'd us afterwards. So yesterday we had a cute little sample that Stephanie was working on with the little gnome guy.
Yeah, a pattern from Midway Wool. And they're just a bunch of gnomes all over this whole quilt. They actually have several different versions of this quilt, but that's our current project. And today, since we thought that we should answer some people's wool questions, we actually brought a lot more samples of completed wool projects. Yeah, exactly. So I guess to start off, this is the wool that WonderFil carries. It's a fat 8, but actually it's a little bit bigger than a fat 8, and it's 100% merino wool from Australia. So our wool's really nice because of the color selection as well. So we have 60 colors of this merino wool. So we brought a color card, and like we kind of mentioned yesterday, all our color cards are on a really good deal right now. So if you're interested in looking for color cards to match for your project, you can take a look at those. But we do have 60 colors of our merino wool. I think a question we get quite commonly is what the difference between mill dyed wool and hand dyed wool is.
Yeah.
Because with first of all, with the mill dyed wool, you're gonna get the same color consistency every time. So I think there's definitely purposes for both, and they both have their own beauty. And you can absolutely mix and match and combine hand dyed wool and mill dyed wool to achieve different effects. But I think it's mostly understanding the difference, and then you can be more aware, I guess, when you're shopping around and seeing what you want to do for your project, whether is you want to add some hand dyed wool in a part of your project, or you want to add some mill dyed wool in part of your project.
So one of the questions we got is our wool does it shrink in the wash, or is it pre-shrunk? So the answer is yes. Our mill dyed wool is pre-shrunk, so it shouldn't really shrink anymore if
No, it shouldn't.
after if you go and wash it again after you've done a
You
project
can
with it.
actually put
again-
it up to probably a warm wash cycle, and you can tumble dry it as well without any issues. It also is very color fast, so you don't have to worry about the wool losing any color if you do decide to wash it.
Yeah, so that's the difference between mill dyed and hand dyed.
Yeah, a lot of it's the finishings, I think. So even if you feel the different types of wool, you'll actually probably be able to tell what technique was used to dye a certain wool.
And the mill dyed wool is going to be a bit more color fast because of all the processes that we put it through after it's been dyed. And the amazing thing is we actually, Stephanie mentioned this yesterday, and some other people were kind of asking about it afterwards, is we talked about how we have wool thread that actually matches 100% with the wool fabric. So if you want to applicate your wool on wool, we have 100% color match with all of our mill dyed wool. So you can see here that the thread and the fabric colors match perfectly. So when you go and applicate them onto a project, you're not going to see it, and it's going to be really beautiful.
Yeah. Another thing I think we should mention before we move on is it is available in these fat 8 sizes, like how we mentioned, but not everyone wants this much wool if they're like, I just want to cut out 5 leaves, you know. So we do have packs in other sizes. So this is one size here.
So this is just kind of just kind of a selection of orange colors, but you can see here we have a bunch of different colorways, like cover different color palettes. And so if you're looking to just kind of build some wool in your stash that you can, always have the right color on hand, this is a great product for that. And this is just example of, like, again, the same threads matching perfectly with those wool colors.
Those barcodes out of the way so you can see a little bit more clearly. So there's a bit of sheen on them because of the wrapper that's on the wool, but we actually have these also in packs. So if you picked up a pack of this and you're wanting to match the wool 100%, we do have some matching sets. Or if you just want to pick up a color, the wool thread is dyed to match exactly the wool thread, and this is the other size that it is available in. So we have this size and this size, so if you don't want the fat 8, we can go for that.
Yeah, and this is just kind of just like a quick overview. We do have like sets that have like all the wool colors, but you can kind of get an idea of like how all the wool threads look here. They're on like nice little spools, because usually when you're appliquing, you don't need too much thread. It's sometimes more about having the right color on hand. So this is like awesome if you always want to have all the colors.
Yeah, and another thing that's one of my favorite aspects of this is, for example, if you bought a pack of this, or if you have a wool thread like this, and you're like, oh, I really want a piece of wool that matches it, you can actually look at the number and it matches the same. So this is EN49 for Alana 49. And if you ever want the wool version of it, you just look up LN 49, and it would be the exact same color. So the number matches the color to make things a little bit easier. And it's also available in a 60 weight thread called Afina. We talked a little bit about it yesterday because Afina was birthed as a hand stitching thread, actually, but people really liked to use it in their machine. So we do have these in smaller spools that also match the wool exactly, and this is Afina.
Yeah, so that's good for when you do like wool on cotton applique.
Yeah.
And maybe we can show some samples, because some people were asking, like, when you do like wool applique or wool embroidery, like what kind of threads do you use? And like we're definitely going to talk about Eleganza, and some people ask like, oh, like do we have floss and things like that? So we'll kind of get into that in a second here. So we'll show some samples first. So this is an awesome pattern by Sue Spargo.
It's called Squash Squad, which is so cute. I think it was a block of the month. It consists of 9 blocks of different types of pumpkins, and she actually uses quite a lot of different weights of Eleganza throughout, and also different techniques. So there's like even crocheting with Eleganza, because our heaviest weight of Eleganza is actually quite thick. So Clista's going to hold them up for you to kind of see.
So there's 3 weights of Eleganza that are available. Okay. If we hold them up to the screen, you can actually really tell from thin to thick. It's actually pretty obvious which one the heaviest one is and which one is like the number 8, like the lightest of the 3, because you can actually it's visible how chunky all these different threads are. So the most common one is this number 8 here.
It's also what's available on the balls. So if you ever are looking at these WonderFil Eleganza balls from us, they're all wrapped in number 8.
Yeah. But if you want like a chunkier size, then you have to go to the Sue Spargo collection that has them available in number 5 and number 3 as well. And so those will give you the chunkier stitches. So I think we can show on the squash maybe like so a number 8 versus a number 3 type of stitch.
Yeah, let me just take a quick look here. So actually, this is a really good example. This is kind of like a woven back stitch. The back stitch is actually with the 8 weight, and what is woven underneath each stitch is a 3 weight. So you can see how much dimension that adds, actually, even like vertical dimension to the piece, because the 3 weight is so puffy. Well, not puffy, it's just thicker. It's a heavier thread compared to the 8 weight. I think another example here is this little vine from the pumpkin. This is actually done, I believe, in 3 weight thread. And then the lighter lines here that are kind of this peachy color, that's number 5. So there's actually quite a lot of heavy threads happening on this little pumpkin. And the chain stitches here are in number 8. So you can see 8, 5, and 3 all on one piece. You can definitely mix and match different weights to create different textures and dimensions. And that's something I really love about this one, is because there's so much happening, but it's like very appealing to look at, and you want to touch it and kind of see it too.
Exactly.
If you want to stick with one weight, of course, that's fine too. But I think it's kind of fun to see different weights even on the same stitch. So
Absolutely.
this is this is a bit of a simpler project. If you really want to get your practice in with bullion knots, this would be the project to do so. So these are all just bullion knots with number 8 weight. And I want to show you what a bullion knot will look like with a number 5 weight. So here, I'll show you again the 8 weight right there. And then on this ladybug right here, whoops, you can see how much more defined those little bullions are just by moving up into a thicker thread for the bullions. So depending on the look that you're going for, or if there's you just want a chunkier bullion or a chunkier stitch, you can absolutely move up your weight in stitching. I guess while we're showing this little sampler here, this is actually a pre-cut wool kit that we have. It's also with Sue Spargo. So it comes with all the die cut pieces of wool, so you don't have to do any of the cutting yourself. There's a few different variations. And there are several patterns of it too. This one is the little bird one here. And as you can see, there's all the little pre-cut circles here. The bird is right there, and there's a background piece of wool. And the end result will look like this. So you can really put whatever thread you want on it. There are some recommended, but for me personally, I really love using heavier threads. I love the 5 weight. So you can see right here that fly stitch is all 5 weight. If you were to use a 8 weight thread, it would look a little bit thinner, but maybe you can put them closer together. So it really depends on the look that you're going for. This is, I think, a good example to show what we were talking about before with Alana. So this is all appliqued down with that pink Alana thread. So this really helps blend in to make it really just look like all wool and nothing else. All those little tiny dots. So this is a really fun kit or stocking stuffer, I think, for people to make. It's nothing too complicated. They just come one block at a time. And we just put 4 together to make this cute little wall hanging. Yeah.
Awesome. So Eleganza is one of the types of embellishment threads that we've been talking about with the wool, and one of the questions was is that always what I should be using with the wool when I do embellishment, or what other types of thread? Because when we talk about quilting or something, we're always like, oh, you have so much to choose from. So even when you're doing hand applique or wool applique, there's a couple different types of threads that we like to use. Another type of thread is the Dazzle thread.
Yes.
So I have been really loving the Dazzle lately on stitches. Are you going to show a sample, Steph?
Yeah, I have some Dazzle on here, so you can go ahead and show.
So Dazzle is a rayon thread, and this one has a little bit of metallic in there too. And this one is from the Starry Night Dazzle collection, which is a variegated Dazzle that has metallic, and I just love the color selection that it comes in. Oh, this one's fun. I've been using this one lately, which is a Stephanie calls it an oil slick color because it's got purples and greens and blues in it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite. I feel like it adds so much fun and unique color.
And this is in an 8 weight, so this would be kind of the same as that Eleganza that we showed earlier, the same weight. So this is cotton, so it's going to have more of a matte finish, but our cotton is finished so beautifully that it has a really nice natural sheen to it that you can actually kind of
You can kind of see it on camera, yeah.
But if you really want to go for something that's like shiny and
high luster
is gonna pop, and like it's nice to kind of have a little bit of sparkle in the project, then the Dazzle is like an awesome touch that you can add to your project, which I have been really loving.
Yeah, so speaking of which, like Starry Night Dazzle, I really love. So we have also another pre-cut wool kit with Wendy Williams, and it's these little fish guys right here. I don't know if any of you guys came to Houston, but I had recently just completed a little project here. I just wanted to use them because they're so cute, and all I did was I used this fat 8 piece of merino wool. This is the exact size, and I didn't cut it at all. I was just like, okay, I'll use this as my background, and then I appliqued all the fish onto that piece of wool and added a little bit of seaweed to make a little bit of an aquarium or a little ocean view of the different fish. And I kind of played around with which ways the fins were facing, or what kind of colors would be on each fish. The one right here follows the pattern pretty closely. And then for the other fish, I was kind of just playing around, and I wanted to add a little bit of metallic to every fish. So this fish right here is kind of that oil slick color that Calista was mentioning right here. I'll try to like kind of move it around so you guys can see how it shines, but it is all over the fish here, and I'll bring it up a little bit closer so you guys can see. So this was a really fun project. And then right here, I added some, right here, I also added some metallic thread. But what's fun about the one on this fish is you guys are probably familiar with Dazzle now because we've mentioned it a few times, but I actually used Glamour for handwork too.
Oh, we showed that yesterday, I think.
Yeah. I think we might have put the spool just in the back there, but Glamour is essentially the sister thread to Dazzle. It's just a little bit finer. We talked about Glamour quite a bit because you can put Glamour through the eye of your needle. But you can of course do handwork with it as well. If you're not wanting like a line that's as thick, you want to do something more delicate, you can definitely use Glamour and get more of a thin thread look. But of course you can use Glamour in your handwork.
Speaking of kind of like Dazzle and Glamour, someone yesterday asked us if we could actually demo how WonderGuard works. So if you've never seen or heard about WonderGuard before, they're kind of like thread wraps that we have that go around the spool of your thread. And speaking of like Dazzle, especially, like it's something that I must have in my sewing box. So you can see here, this is one spool that I've been using, and I wrapped it with a WonderGuard. So after your thread is open, you can see once I released it, the thread kind of wants to pop off because the thread is rayon and it's very slippery. So this is just kind of for me to kind of keep it nice and tidy and keep the dust off of it as well. So I just wrap it around my spool nice and tight, but it's actually still loose enough, so if I, like, pull off the thread, I actually don't even have to undo the WonderGuard to get the thread off of the spool. But when you are using, like, larger spools that are, like, kind of with those decorative threads.
Do you want me to get that Glamour?
Yeah, maybe Stephanie can go grab a Glamour. We actually have a larger size. So the one I just showed you was the smaller size. So you can see we actually have 2 sizes available. So for like the smaller size spools like that, this is going to use like these size of WonderGuard. But for our regular size spools, you do want to use one of these types. And it's not just for storage at that point, with especially like these larger spools. It's actually functional as well. So
this is Glamour. This is the slightly finer version of Dazzle that I was kind of mentioning. So this one already had a WonderGuard on it, but you can see this one's slightly longer to account for the wider spool. And it's the same idea. You can wrap it tightly for storage like this. Or if you actually want to sew with it, is that what you were kind of talking about while I was away? Let me just make sure it's untucked. Okay.
So you want to maybe...
Okay, so you make sure the thread is coming off the top here. It's very dry in Calgary, so there's a lot of static happening. All right. So you actually just want to put it a little bit looser, so
to form a sleeve.
Enough so you can actually move the thread around. It's not so tight. And the thread, I'm trying to find a spot where you can see the green a little bit better. Right in front of Callista. So if I just pull the thread like this, you can see that the tension is actually quite consistent.
And it's releasing like just the right amount of thread. And this is especially good with like threads that might pool or stuff like that too. So it just kind of keeps it all contained, and you can keep this on while you're sewing on your sewing machine. So
yes. I think another thing people sometimes might relate this to is like a thread net, but this is quite different actually, because with a thread net, since the way that it's made, basically the shape of a thread net, it can actually create some friction on the outside of your thread. Your thread can catch on it a little bit.
Yes.
So you can imagine if your thread is drawing from the bottom, there's going to be a lot more resistance through your spool and through the thread net before it comes off your spool, and then when it reaches here, it's just going to come off. So the differences in tension are going to be a lot greater with a thread net, and although this wouldn't eliminate that friction completely, it would greatly reduce it just because of the texture of WonderGuard.
It's smooth.
Exactly. It's not going to be as catchy.
Exactly. So that was kind of like the little demo on WonderGuard. So I highly suggest these on like more of the decorative threads that like tend to be a little bit more slippery, like rayons, sometimes even like the trilobal polyesters, and of course metallic threads.
Yeah, I think
fantastic
when you have as much thread as I think most of you guys do, these kind of little accessories are helpful to keep things organized, if not help you with sewing a little bit.
Yeah.
But that was back to handwork, I guess.
Back to handwork. So another question we got was, people know we have a lot of pearl cotton threads.
Yeah.
Oops, I'm juggling them in my hand. We have a lot of pearl cotton threads. And so people wonder, like, what's the difference between using pearl cotton and floss? Because I think a lot of people like have maybe used floss before, or they just... that's kind of like what they think of when they like think of hand embroidery.
A lot of people too, floss is like an introductory thread.
Yeah.
But the way that it's manufactured is actually quite different too. And the way that it's used is quite different. As some of you guys are probably familiar with, floss is... you're able to separate floss into strands. So whether you want one strand up to 6 strands, depending on how thick you want it, floss can do that for you. Pearl cotton is twisted actually quite a bit tighter, so you can't separate pearl cotton, which is why you actually move up and down in sizes and weights.
Yeah.
So,
but it gives you a totally different look as well, because like with floss, when you separate the strands, you're kind of doing that yourself, and generally you're not really twisting them too much back together, and even if you do, you're not going to get like a tight twist that you would get like from doing these back in the factory. So I find that when you do stitches with floss, they tend to look a little bit flatter, and there's not as much sheen to the thread.
Yeah, I think, again, going back to how it's made, the floss has to be a little bit looser in order to let people to separate the strands. Otherwise it'd be a nightmare, I think, if it was super tightly twisted. I think on the benefits of floss is if you do a lot of satin stitching, if you're like wanting to fill areas, I think that's a very popular use for floss. For pearl cotton, though, because of the tight twist, we kind of mentioned how strands and twists work yesterday, but pearl cotton is always round. So that's why you're always going to get quite a bit of dimension with a pearl cotton versus a floss.
And your stitches look like a lot fuller with using a pearl cotton for hand embroidery versus like using floss. And if you guys are used to using floss and you want to know like what kind of like the equivalent of that would be for pearl cotton, is if you have one strand of floss, it would be similar to kind of like one strand of our spaghetti thread here, which is a 12 weight Egyptian cotton. And if you use about 2 strands of floss, that would be very similar to using our 8 weight here. I don't know if we can actually pull off a little bit of
Yeah,
this.
I think that one's open.
Yeah, so you can see this would be similar approximately to about 2 strands of floss together. And then our number 5 pearl cotton, the medium chunky one, is going to be similar to 4 strands of floss. And the number 3, so you can see here, this one's like even chunkier, is going to be equivalent to about 6 strands of floss. So you can kind of consider that when you're choosing which weight of thread you want to sew with and kind of how you want the stitches to look. Again, like maybe Stephanie can show some of the samples.
Yeah.
But a lot of the more decorative embellishment type stitches beyond just like satin stitches, they look really nice with the pearl cotton over the floss because it is more dimensional.
Yeah, this might look a little bit familiar to you guys. This is called the 90-Day Circle Sampler, also by Sue Spargo. What's interesting is I don't have that many years of experience under my belt, to be honest, but when COVID came around, Sue actually released a pattern called the 90-Day Circle Sampler. And every day for 3 months, she released one circle and the pattern and the threads to use with each circle. And so I kind of just went one circle at a time and learned a lot of different new stitches. As you can see, I did not do 90. I think I did 48 or something like that, because it is, handwork is a labor. All sewing is a labor of love, but definitely handwork takes some time. So I kind of stopped halfway, but I learned so much in this quilt, and I really was able to play with a lot of different weights and patterns. So, for example, you can see on the outside of this circle here, I used a 3 weight on the outline and a 5 weight for the bullions because I wanted something really chunky. 5 weight's a personal favorite of mine, which is why I feature it a lot. You can see this is a lot of just bullion knots. This is all 5 weight. And you see this definition? That's from the round thread that we're kind of talking about. You can see the separation in each wrap. So that's a decorative element for sure. And let me see if I can find some 8 weight. So 8 weight would be right here. These little stitches right there. That's all 8 weight. And there's some Dazzle in here as well. So this snowflake, perfect for winter. It's always a little hard to show metallic on camera, but the snowflake is all made with Dazzle, as well as I like a butterfly.
I like the butterfly because you can see the Eleganza right beside the Dazzle as well. So I feel like it helps the Dazzle pop even more when there's like another kind of more like matte thread to compare it right beside.
Yeah, so the butterfly right there is Dazzle. I mean, if you guys want to do this, it's a really fun quilt, and I will definitely say you get a lot of practice with making bullion knots. But it gives you an opportunity to play with a lot of colors and a lot of different weights. And I did a little bit of a cheat here because you're like, wow, 90 circles is a lot to cut out. But luckily we also have, let me see. I think we brought out some right here.
Okay.
So we actually also have pre-cut circles.
Because circles are the most annoying shape to cut sometimes.
They are. We have them in 6 different sizes. So this is just 3 of them. I think the original pattern called for 1-inch circles. But because I was a little bit newer at stitching at the time, and also because these were bigger, it's a little bit easier for me. These are 1.5 inches. And I just opened a few color packs of this and appliqued them on. And it was, oh my gosh, it was probably like hours of time saving. So the pre-cut circles really come in handy when you're doing projects with a lot of polka dots on it, or if you're designing something with a lot of polka dots on it.
And here's a tip that we talked about recently on our Instagram. So for those of you guys that follow our Instagram, you may know that we do Tip Tuesday every week. And this is a tip that we kind of got recently from our friends at Kai Scissors. But they told us, because we were telling them about like how we do like a lot of wool work. So when you work with like wool, and if you're cutting complex shapes, like sometimes like the fabric slips, especially if you have like freezer paper on top and you're trying to like control all the layers to cut like the accurate shapes. It's better to use serrated scissors to do that kind of cutting because it grips a little bit more and it won't slip as much when you're doing the actual cutting. So
for example, when you're cutting, I think, wool or some fabric, you can see the fabric move away like this as you're cutting, which impacts kind of the accuracy of the shape you're trying to cut. So like with what Callista said, the serrated scissors holds the fabric here right in place so you can cut down without the fabric shifting or moving out from the scissors, so you can get a much cleaner cut, or maybe the shape that you were originally trying to achieve.
Exactly. So that's just like a nice tip. So if you don't follow us on Instagram, make sure you do so, because there's helpful tips like that every single week. And we try to think of, different things that might be useful for everyone to know.
Actually, another fun fact is the background piece of this is also that fat 8. So it's the same size as that piece of fabric we've been holding up constantly. So yeah, the edges might have been trimmed a bit for the quilting on it, but it's the same piece, and I think the edges were just trimmed a bit if I wasn't as even there. And then this is another piece that is so much fun. This is called Chirp. Again, some of you may have seen it, some of you may have not. I think it's been out for about a year or so now, maybe a year or two, but it's a really fun quilt with a bunch of different birds on it. Sue does a lot of folk art style hand embroidery, which usually results in these like cute looking birds. And again, you can combine a bunch of different stitches on there. We definitely use pre-cut circles here. We did not cut them ourselves, and you can kind of see the effect. But I mean, we're just kind of showing you completed samples, but there's so much fun stuff you can do with it.
And then speaking of embellishment, one thing that is not really related to wool, but kind of got brought up as a question yesterday is, what should I use for like big stitch binding, which is like becoming a really big trend nowadays. So we had a sample to actually show, and this is,
we have some loose thread from.
Is this spaghetti? I think, or
this is Eleganza.
No, it's spaghetti, isn't it? It's spaghetti.
Oh, it's spaghetti.
Yeah.
It is spaghetti.
So this is like the 12 weight thread spaghetti that we said was like the equivalent of one strand of floss, but you can actually use this in your sewing machine as well with like a 90-14 top stitch needle. But this is just kind of like some ideas of like, if you want to do that big stitch binding look, then you can look to use spaghetti, and this will be about the type of look you'll be able to get with that. And spaghetti is really smooth to hand stitch with. If you want something even chunkier, then you can think about using the Eleganza if you want something chunkier than how this looks.
Yeah, I think I forgot to mention we have an Eleganza collection with Allison Glass as well. And last year she had Stitch Along, and it was like a cantha quilt. And so the whole thing was big stitches, big stitching. Yeah. And it was essentially, she did quite simple piecing, whether it was like blocks or stripes. I think like jelly roll width stripes. And then after, she just used Eleganza, like literally 8-weight Eleganza, and just did a running stitch on the whole quilt. And even though it's quite simple, it's not maybe as complex as some of this hand embroidery. Yeah, it was kind of like a meditative thing. It was really nice because you can just sit on the couch and just do running stitches, choose different colors, the effect that you wanted.
I would say this time of year, it's nice to do projects with wool, because I just feel like it's kind of like a cozy winter project for those of you that are in the Northern Hemisphere.
I think Allison has another stitch along right now too. That's also
the cozy quilt.
The cozy quilt. Yeah, the cozy
that's starting
quilt.
In January, I think.
So there's also, she also does some like slow, simple stitching on that one, which was really, really
so
fun.
There's a lot of awesome like projects and patterns out there right now with like slow stitching and like hand stitching and embellishments and all that stuff. So definitely check out all those different patterns, because there's lots of fun stuff to do with these heavier weight threads. And I've really enjoyed the feeling of kind of stitching through wool, it has like a really satisfying, like tactile feel to it.
I think wool is also really forgiving.
Yeah.
If you're stitching on like quilting fabric versus wool, you'll definitely notice that wool will be more forgiving in the way that you don't have to mind your tension as much. You still have to be a little bit mindful, but wool's going to be okay for that. And another thing is if you poke a hole in the wrong spot, it's not necessarily going to leave a hole in your fabric. Especially when you're using a larger needle for these threads. So I love wool work.
Yeah. One tip that we will give you though to like kind of create beautiful stitches that like look at like the ones that Stephanie showed you is like don't pull too tight when you're doing your stitching, when you're doing your handwork. I've kind of learned that as I've done a little bit more. When I pull my stitches really tight, it kind of like shrinks the stitch a little and it doesn't look like as full and nice. So
yeah, I think maybe in the future we might do some stitch alongs. It's kind of a similar vibe. It's going to be quite casual, but I think we talk about machine tension a lot, but in this case, you're the machine. So yeah, the difference between pulling really tight or leaving some room so your stitch looks like bigger and it takes up more space, it looks a little bit more full. I think that could be like a fun thing that we could talk about in the future too, or show people in the future.
Exactly. Okay, so I think that's all the questions that we had regarding wool work, and then we threw in some like extra tips and like topics that we thought would go well with those questions. But we might be back again tomorrow. We'll see how many questions we get again after this live. So if there's anything that you want us to answer or kind of talk about, just like leave them in the comments, and we're gonna try to maybe like create another casual Q&A session if there's enough questions for that.
Exactly.
So
thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Have a good Saturday.
Yeah, have a good Saturday.
Bye.